Okay, so now we're going to discuss interest rate swaps. Swaps are basically the most common type of instrument that is used to hedge interest rate risk. So, an interest rate swap is over the counter arrangement. So, you won't find them on stock exchanges. They are negotiated over the counter between two parties to exchange interest rate or receipts on a notional principal amount for a specific period of time. You need to note that the interest obligations will be in the same currency to keep it simple, and there is no exchange or payment of principal under an interest rate swap. Now we're going to look at this example in order to understand how does a swap work. Consider a hypothetical 3-year swap initiated on March 5, 2014 between Microsoft and Intel. We suppose Microsoft agrees to pay Intel an interest rate of 5% per annum. So Microsoft has agreed to pay Intel an interest rate of 5% per annum, which is fixed on a principal of $100 million. So this is a notional principal. It is not going to be exchanged. It is just used for calculation purposes. And in return, Intel agrees to pay Microsoft the 6-month LIBOR rate at the same principal. And then in turn, Intel is going to pay the LIBOR rate, the floating rate. So that is how an exchange usually works. So one party pays fixed and the other receives the floating rate. So Microsoft is the fixed rate payer. As you can see, Microsoft is paying the fixed rate. So it is the fixed rate payer in this scenario. And Intel is the floating rate payer. We assume this agreement specifies that payments are to be exchanged every 6 months and that the 5% interest is quoted with semi-annual compounding. So it's the 6 monthly rate, and the exchange is going to happen after every 6 months. So how is the exchange going to happen? This is the structure for it. So cash flow in millions of dollars to Microsoft in 100 million 3-year interest rate swap when a fixed rate of 5% is paid and LIBOR is received. So we're thinking it from the view of Microsoft. Microsoft was the fixed rate payer, so it's going to always pay 5%. And 5% is the annual rate. If you convert it into semi-annual rate, 5% divided by 2, that would mean 2.5%. So in each 6-month period, Microsoft is going to pay 2.5% and he's going to receive whatever is the LIBOR at that time. Now over here you can see that the LIBOR rates have been given. Moreover, you should note that the LIBOR rate is being set at the beginning of the period and then the payment is going to happen at the end of the period. So on March 5th, this is when the contract has started. The LIBOR rate was 4.2%. So this LIBOR rate has now been set because the LIBOR rate is going to fluctuate even in the middle during the 6 months. So you need to determine at what point you're going to select the floating rate. So you're going to select it at the start of the period at the 4.2%. And once the 6 months go by, you're going to give the payment of 2.10 on September 5th based on this 4.2 rate. Similarly, whatever is the rate over here, so 4.8, this rate will be applied to the next 6 months and the payment of this 4.8 will come after 6 months, which will be 2.4. So you can see that this payment actually is coming here. This one is coming here. It's like this. And you do not need the LIBOR rate over here because the last payment is going to end over here. So the 6 payments will be done. The 3-year swap will be done. 3-year semi-annual swap. So this makes it 1 year, 2-year, and 3-year. Now again over here you can see that this is the rate. So how did we get 2.1? These are all annual rates. You need to convert it into semi-annual, which means all of them will be divided by 2. So 4.2 divided by 2 will give you 2.1. This will give you 2.4 and so on. So you need to convert all of them into the semi-annual rate simply by dividing the rate by 2. If it's semi-annual, we divide it by 2. If it's quarterly, we divide it by 4 and so on. Now this is the cash flow that Microsoft is going to receive based on that. So 2.1 multiplied by 100 million will give you 2.1. So this is the amount they've Microsoft will receive, and this is the amount that Microsoft has to pay based on the fixed interest rate of 2.5%. So the net payment is 0.4. Microsoft has to pay to Intel over here. This negative means that Microsoft has to pay to Intel. Now, this is another important aspect of swap, that these payments are not exchanged. It's not like Microsoft is going to receive these payments and then make these payments. The net amount is exchanged. So if Intel has to pay 2.1 and Microsoft has to pay 2.4, Microsoft is going to say that, okay, I'll just pay you 0.5, 0.4. You do not have to pay me 2.1. So this is how the swap agreement works. And you can see that as the interest rate increases, Microsoft starts to receive payments. It goes into positive. So it depends upon the interest rate, whether the floating rate pair will pay to the fixed or the fixed one will pay to the floating rate. Now, moving ahead, basically swaps are used to transform a liability. This means that somebody who is stuck with a fixed rate and wants a floating rate can arrange a swap in order to arrange this. And similarly, somebody who is already on floating rate terms but wants to go on to fixed rate terms will also utilize a swap. Now let's look at an example of how this is done. So for Microsoft, the swap could be used to transform a floating rate loan into a fixed rate loan. So let's draw a diagram together in order to understand this, even though the diagram is over here. So Microsoft could be used to transform a floating rate loan into a fixed. So they want to transform their floating into a fixed. That means currently they are paying floating to somebody else, and they want to transform it to fixed. Now, if they're going to pay fixed, they're going to receive floating over here. Okay, this is something that happens in swap. Suppose that Microsoft has arranged to borrow 100 million and LIBOR plus 10 basis points. So the floating rate that they are paying to somebody else is LIBOR plus 10 basis point means 0.1%. Now, how is this going to work? On the other side, you can have Intel or you can have a bank, anything would work. It pays LIBOR plus 0.1% to its outside lenders. It receives LIBOR under the terms of the swap because it's going to receive floating, right? This is the diagram that we made. So it's going to receive LIBOR and it pays 5% under the terms of the swap. So the swap rate decided over here is 5%. So this is the fixed rate that he will be paying to Intel, or you could say to any other bank. So what is the net interest payment? It is going to be fixed 5.1%. You have actually converted the floating into a fixed rate. Now, how did this happen? Let's just write down. So it pays LIBOR plus 0.1%. Moreover, you can see it pays LIBOR plus 0.1%, plus it pays a fixed rate of 5%. So I'm going to write this as well. A fixed rate of 5%. And it receives the LIBOR, which is the floating rate. Now, if you do the calculation, you can see that this negative will multiply by this. So let's just open this bracket. And over here also you have negative because I've opened up the bracket now. Now, LIBOR and LIBOR will get cancelled. Now you have 5% and 0.1%, both negative. Negative plus negative will give you negative 5.1%. The negative is just showing that this is a cash outflow. They have to pay this amount. So now if you look at this is what is happening. Look at the diagram once again. What is happening is that Intel is paying LIBOR to Microsoft, and in turn, Microsoft is paying LIBOR plus 0.1% to somebody else. So even you can see it to the diagram that they're receiving LIBOR and then they're paying LIBOR. So LIBOR and LIBOR is like canceled out. They'll receive LIBOR and they'll pay LIBOR. And 0.1%, but they still have to pay extra over here. And plus they have to pay the fixed 5% over here as well. So that means they're in total paying 5.1%. That is going to be their net interest payment. So they have converted their floating rate into a fixed rate agreement. Now, similarly, we're going to look at Intel. So Intel, the swap could have the effect of transforming a fixed rate loan into a floating rate loan. So what does Intel want? Intel simply wants to convert its fixed rate into a floating rate, which means currently Intel is paying fixed rate to somebody else and he wants to convert it to floating. That means in the swap agreement, he will be the fixed rate receiver. Okay, and let's just keep the same terminology. So I'll just write Microsoft over here. Suppose that Intel has a 3-year, 100 million loan outstanding on which it pays 5.2%. So it is paying 5.2% to the outside lenders. Okay, so first we did this side of the diagram. Now we're doing this side of the diagram. So you can just ignore this part. So Intel is paying 5.2% to its outside. Now what is happening over here? It is also paying LIBOR. You can see it's paying the floating rate. So it's going to pay LIBOR to Microsoft and it's receiving fixed. Now what is this fixed rate? The fixed rate is 5% under the terms of the swap. Now we need to calculate its net interest payment once again, and it should come to LIBOR plus 0.2% because we wanted to convert the fixed into the floating one. So let's write it down. They are paying fixed 5.2%, so negative 5.2%, plus they are paying the floating, they are paying the LIBOR rate. So I'll just write this, and they are receiving the fixed 5%. They are receiving the fixed 5%. So now you can see that LIBOR is not getting cancelled by anything. So you have LIBOR over here. Then you have 5.2% negative and 5%. So this is negative 5.2%. Take the negative out. So this will become LIBOR plus 5.2%. Sorry, plus 0.2%. Sorry about this because 5.2 minus 5 will give you 0.2. So this is now the rate that they are paying and they have effectively converted their fixed rate loan into a floating rate loan. Now let's do one more example to understand this better. A corporate has borrowed $20 million under a 5-year bank term loan. The loan is a floating rate loan, okay? Let's draw the diagram. So we have a corporate. So this is our corporate. Has borrowed a 20 million under a 5-year bank term loan. The loan is a floating rate whereby the corporate pays 6-month US dollar LIBOR plus a margin of 50 basis points. So over here, it is paying LIBOR plus 50 basis points to some person from which it has taken loan. So it's maybe bank, we'll call it bank A. The corporate wants to change the interest basis from floating to fixed. So they don't want this floating, they want to pay fixed. And if they're going to pay fixed, they will have to receive floating. Okay, and receives floating rate. So the floating rate will be LIBOR. And over here, let's say we have some bank B from which you have agreed the swap. So let's look if we made the diagram correct or not. Yes, we made the diagram correctly. So there he is going to receive floating and pay fixed. And if we calculate the net position, then it is coming pay fixed of plus 50 bips. Now, how is this coming? Again, you can see that they are paying LIBOR plus 50 bips. So LIBOR. Okay, so I'm not writing positive because then I'll have to, you can write it both ways. It's up to you. I'm using this because it's a negative payment, right? It's paying this, so that's why. Now over here, you are receiving floating. So you're going to receive the LIBOR and you're going to pay whatever is the fixed rate agreed in the swap. So based on this, you can see LIBOR and LIBOR will get cancelled and you will pay the fixed plus the, 50 bips converted by doing this fixed plus 50 bips. Remember that the negative signs that I use is just to note the cash flow, the cash outflow and inflow, nothing else. Now let's look at an example. What happens, what is the effect of the interest rate swap? So let us assume that the fixed rate payable under the swap is 5%. So now they have told you that the fixed rate payable under the swap, so this is 5%. So this becomes 5% plus 50 bips, 5.5%. This is the fixed rate agreed. The US dollar LIBOR for the first 6 months of the swap is 4%, and they told you that the floating rate is now 4%. At the end of the first 6 months, the net cash payment is the swap term, and you need to calculate here what is the net cash payment in this case. So let's calculate this. Company pays 5% on US dollars. So you can see that the company was paying. Okay, so company, they've started from here. So company is paying 5% to this bank over here. So if we calculate the amount for this, it will be 0.05, 20 million is the notional principal, and then it's for 6 months, so 182, and because you're dealing with dollars, 360, so you get negative 505, 555, plus the company is receiving floating. So the company is receiving the LIBOR, and the LIBOR is now 4%. So 4% times 20, this is the amount that they are going to receive. Now the last strip was that LIBOR plus 50 bips is going to be paid over here. So that means 4 plus 5. That means 0.045 times 20. And so this is the amount that they have to pay. So if you calculate the net amount that is payable by the company to the bank is 101,111. You can even check whether this is a fixed payment or not by simply dividing this by the amount loan was 20 million, right? This should give you the 5.5% fixed rate that was decided. Remember, the fixed was 5% plus 50 bips. So this is what you should get regardless of whatever is the rate, because the person has gone from floating to fixed. Okay, so I hope this is clear.